My name is Wanda Adams, I'm 34 years old, and at my sister's wedding, my seat was a folding chair pushed up against the kitchen doors. Every guest in that barn had a place card with their name printed in pretty script. My ex had one. The bride's yoga friends had one. The woman who had paid $19,000 toward that wedding did not. When I asked about it, my sister smiled in her white dress and said, "That's where plus ones sit." So I walked to the gift table, picked up my gift, turned around, and said, "Plus one this." She ran after me in front of everyone. But here's what none of them knew. The bills for that perfect wedding had not finished arriving, and what I did next cost my family far more than a folding chair. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women finally stop paying for people who never saved them a seat. If stories about family, self-respect, and hard-earned boundaries speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because this story gets worse before it gets better. Let me back up, because you need to know who I was in that family before you can understand the chair. I run a small accounting office in a suburb outside Dayton, Ohio. 4 employees, 1 coffee maker, a bell on the door. My clients are farmers, shop owners, retired teachers. People who count their money because they earned every dollar of it. I built that office myself, 6 years ago, the same year my father died. Dad was a mechanic. Frank Adams, hands like sandpaper, heart like a furnace. He used to sit at our kitchen table with his checkbook and tell me, "Numbers don't lie, honey. People do the lying for them." I thought he was teaching me bookkeeping. He was teaching me my whole future. I balance books for a living. I know exactly what things cost. That turned out to be the problem. After Dad's funeral, somebody had to make sure my mother's lights stayed on. Somebody had to make sure my little sister Madison finished her yoga certification. Somebody had to be the person the family called when the water heater quit or the insurance letter looked scary. Nobody held a meeting. Nobody voted. The job just slid across the table to me, quiet as a bill in an envelope, and I signed for it. That's the thing about being the strong one. Nobody ever has to ask you. They just hand you the weight and compliment your posture. For 6 years, I told myself that was love. Maybe some of it was, but I've done enough audits to know that a number can look healthy right up until the day you finally check what's behind it. My family's books were about to get checked. Here's what 6 years of being the strong one looked like on paper. Every month, $650 moved from my account to cover my mother's utilities and her homeowner's insurance. Autopay. She never saw a bill, so she never saw a reason to say thank you. 2 years ago, her roof started leaking into the guest room. I paid for the new one. Last year, the transmission went out on Madison's car a week before her first big teaching job. I paid for that too. I recorded all of it in my father's old green ledger, the one he kept household accounts in since before I was born. Not because I planned to collect. It's just what accountants do. You write things down. The ledger knew the truth even when nobody else wanted it. And nobody wanted it. My mother, Carol, stood in the fellowship hall after church every Sunday in her good coat and told the ladies, "We managed just fine." As if the money appeared through effort she and the Lord split evenly. My name never came up. I'd sit 2 folding tables away with a paper cup of coffee and listen to her collect sympathy for being a widow and admiration for being so capable, all in the same breath. My mother had a gift, and I say that honestly. She could spend money she never earned and somehow collect the gratitude too. Most people have to pick one. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as Mom was warm and Madison was moving forward. A younger, tireder version of me really believed that. Then Madison got engaged, and I got to find out exactly how much the credit mattered. Madison called me on a Tuesday night, out of breath and laughing. "He proposed. Wanda, he proposed at the Overlook." I was happy for her. I want that on the record. My sister is 27. She teaches yoga part-time, and when she's excited her voice still sounds 9 years old. Derek Whitfield had proposed. The Whitfields were a name in our part of town. Big brick house, whitened smiles, a Christmas card that looked like a catalog. Derek sold medical equipment on commission and drove a leased truck that cost more than his salary some months, but the shine was the point. My mother reacted like someone had plugged her back into the wall. A Whitfield wedding. she kept saying, hand on her chest. Our family, joined with the Whitfields. She hugged Madison. She cried a little. Then she turned to me. And I promise you this is true. The second full sentence my mother said after the engagement was about money. You know weddings run about $36,000 these days, honey. Not a question. A forecast. Like a weather report where I was the sky. I laughed it off that night. But over the next week, the calls started. Venues, caterers, a florist Patricia Whitfield recommended. Mom sighed about Dad's life insurance being long gone. Madison talked about her dream barn venue with fairy lights. And at some point my mother said the line she'd been building toward all along. Your father would want his girls launched properly. She knew exactly which wrench turned me. That night I sat at my kitchen table, opened the green ledger to a clean page and wrote a new heading at the top. Madison. Wedding. I had no idea I was opening a case file. By spring, I had put $19,000 into that wedding. I can break it down the way I'd break it down for a client. $8,000 for the venue. A restored barn called Willow Bend, 40 minutes from my house. $6,500 to the caterer. $2,500 to the florist. $2,000 to the photographer. Every contract had my name on it, because I was the one writing the checks, and vendors like their contract signed by the person whose money is real. Here's the part I want you to watch closely, because I missed it in real time. Whenever a payment was due, my mother would appear at my office like a supervisor. Just give me the check, sweetheart. I'm meeting the caterer anyway. You're so busy. And whenever the Whitfields asked about costs at those little planning dinners, Mom would fold her hands and say, It's all taken care of. We believe in doing things right. The checks were mine. The sentence was hers. I felt something snag on that. The way you feel a decimal in the wrong place before you can point to it. So I asked Madison straight out, one afternoon while she addressed invitations at my kitchen table. Does Derek's family know how this wedding is actually being paid for? She didn't even look up. Why does it matter? It's family money. Family money. I let it go, because the invitations were pretty, and her hair was in a braid like when she was little, and you don't audit your baby sister over envelopes. It mattered. I just didn't know yet how much, or who had been drawing up a very different set of books about me the whole time. The first real shove came in April. Madison sat me down at a coffee shop, which should have been my clue, because my family only chooses public places when they're about to do something shabby. So, the bridal party, she said, stirring her latte like it owed her money. It's going to be my college girls and Derek's cousins. Patricia wants a certain look for the photos. You get it, right? A certain look. I was 34 years old and I would apparently curdle the pictures standing next to a row of 25-year-olds. I kept my voice level and asked her the question I had earned. Maddie, is there a reason I keep getting moved to the edges of this wedding? And my sister reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said something that sounded almost like a compliment. Wanda, you're the backbone, not the decoration. You're the one who makes it all happen. The backbone, buried somewhere under the skin where nobody has to look at it. I want to be fair to the woman I was that spring. I did notice. I did push back. I even sat down one night with the 4 contracts and checked what canceling would cost me, line by line. Every deposit was paid and non-refundable. The money was already gone, sunk into flowers and a barn, and walking away would have punished me twice, and my sister once. So I did what responsible people do, which is exactly what people like my mother count on. I stayed useful. From that week on, the wedding only called me by one name. Wanda, the florist needs a decision. Wanda, can you call the caterer? Wanda, the backbone. Bones, as it turns out, are the last thing anyone thanks. The rehearsal dinner was at an Italian place with long tables, and my seat was at the far end, wedged between a teenage cousin and the coffee station. I could live with that. What I couldn't quite swallow came with the toasts. My mother stood, lifted her glass, and glowed. When Frank passed, I promised myself my baby girl would still have everything, and tonight, look around. I made it happen. The room applauded. Patricia Whitfield dabbed her eyes. Derek raised his glass to my mother like she was a war hero. I sat by the coffee machine holding a breadstick, listening to a woman take a bow for 6 years of my checkbook. 2 seats down, my Aunt Ruth was frowning at the printed seating diagram the planner had left near the gifts, the one for tomorrow's reception. Ruth is my father's sister, 66 years old, allergic to nonsense. She tapped the paper and muttered, mostly to herself, "That's not the chart I saw last week." The comment drowned in laughter over some story Derek was telling. I barely registered it. I wish I had. There was one kind moment that night, and it came from Ruth. Because of course it did. She caught my arm by the coat rack and nodded toward the loud, glittering table. "Frank used to say this family runs on one engine," she said. "He meant you, honey." I almost went back inside and asked Madison, one more time, why the wedding kept happening around me instead of with me. I had the question loaded. Then my mother materialized the way she always does when truth gets too close, and handed me a task. "Wanda, be a dear. Go check with the venue about parking." The wedding morning started with my phone ringing at 7. It was the florist, and she was near tears. Her refrigerated van had died overnight, and a third of the centerpieces had wilted soft in the heat. Now, here is a fact about weddings nobody thinks about until it's too late. Vendors don't take instructions from just anyone. They take instructions from the name on the contract. That name was Wanda Adams. So while my sister got her hair curled and my mother got her makeup airbrushed, I was at a wholesale flower market across town with a cart, buying every white rose and stem of eucalyptus they had, $300 out of my own pocket, loading buckets into my trunk like a getaway driver. I texted my mother that there was a flower emergency and I was handling it. Her reply came fast. "Don't bother the girls with this. Handle it quietly." At the time, I read that as trust. Hold that thought. I got to Willow Bend by 10 and spent 2 hours in the prep room with the florist's crew, stripping thorns until my thumbs were raw. Around noon, the wedding planner, a brisk young woman named Dana with a clipboard and an earpiece, stuck her head in. She looked at me a beat too long. "You're family, right? The sister?" I said I was. She frowned down at her clipboard. "Huh. I had you somewhere else on my chart. There must have been a..." And then her earpiece crackled about the shuttle being late, and she was gone, and the sentence just hung there in the cooler air with the roses. I have replayed that half sentence more times than I want to admit. I'll say this much for my family. The ceremony was beautiful. They held it on the lawn behind the barn, rows of white chairs facing an arch of the roses I had hauled across town that morning. I sat in the 3rd row. The 1st row held my mother and the Whitfields. The 2nd row held Derek's cousins and the bridal party's overflow. The sister of the bride sat in row 3, behind a man in a golf shirt who filmed the whole thing on his phone at arm's length. And you know what? When the music changed and Madison came down that aisle, none of it mattered for a minute. She was luminous. She had our dad's dark eyes, and when Derek took her hands, she did a little bounce on her toes, the same bounce she's done since her 5th birthday. I cried into a tissue like everybody else, because I love my sister. I need you to know that before everything else happens. The sting came at the end, small and precise. The officiant beamed at the crowd and asked everyone to applaud, the families who made this day possible. My mother rose, alone, and did a slow wave like a woman on a parade float. The applause rolled over her. From row 3, staring at the back of her head, I clapped too. Habit is a powerful thing. Then the chairs emptied toward the barn for cocktail hour, and I hung back to settle the flower market payment on my phone. One last invoice, one last quiet fix. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was where they finally showed me my place. Literally. The barn had been transformed. Fairy lights in the rafters, long farm tables with linen runners, and near the entrance, a table of place cards fanned out in alphabetical rows, each name in looping gold script. I came in late from settling the flower bill, smoothed my dress, and went looking for the A's. Aldrich, Abbott, Anderson. I went through them twice. There was no Wanda Adams. I stood there while guests reached around me, plucking their names and drifting off to their tables, and I told myself it was a misprint, a card fallen on the floor, something small. I flagged down Dana, the planner, who scrolled her tablet with a professional little frown that kept getting less professional. You're not on my final chart, she said. I'm so sorry, there must have been a change. There's overflow seating by the service doors. She walked me to it herself, because she was decent and clearly mortified. Past table 1, where my mother sat centered among the Whitfields like a jewel in a setting. Past table 5, past the band. To the back wall of the barn, beside the double doors where the catering staff banged through with trays, there stood a single brown folding chair. Someone had thrown a white cloth over it, which somehow made it worse, like a sheet over furniture nobody uses. No table, no place card. A folding chair in the service lane, close enough to the kitchen that I could feel the fryer heat every time the doors swung. Dana said the word final again. Final chart. And something in the back of my head lit up like a check engine light. That's not the chart I saw last week. Ruth's voice, from the rehearsal dinner. I was still standing there doing that math when a wall of white silk came gliding toward me, and my sister's voice, bright as a bell, said, "There you are." "Maddie," I said, and I kept it gentle, because it was her day, and I am not the scene my family thinks I am. There's been a mix-up with the seating. I'm not on the chart. My sister looked at the folding chair, then at me, and she didn't miss a step. 2 bridesmaids flanked her, and a cluster of Derek's people stood close enough to hear everything over the band. "Oh, that's the overflow seat," Madison said, with a little laugh, light as frosting. "That's where +1s sit." I waited for her to hear it. She didn't. Somebody behind her chuckled. A bridesmaid studied her champagne. And I stood there in the dress I'd bought for her wedding, beside the chair by the kitchen, and I looked around that barn. Really looked. For the first time in 14 months. My mother at table 1, laughing with her hand on Tom Whitfield's sleeve. The teenage cousin from the rehearsal, seated. The golf shirt man, seated. And at table 5, with his name in gold script on a little easel card, Kyle Brennan, my ex. The man I dated for 2 years before he took a job in Cincinnati, invited because he works with Derek. Kyle had a real seat at my sister's wedding, and I had a folding chair in the fryer exhaust. Every guest in that barn had a place except the one who had paid for the barn. Something in me went very quiet and very clear, the way a spreadsheet goes clear when the last bad number finally shows itself. I didn't yell. I didn't cause the scene they were all suddenly hoping for. I walked to the gift table, found the silver box with my name on the tag, the one with a $5,000 check inside it, and I picked it up. Then I turned around, looked my sister in the eye and said, "+1 this." And I walked. Through the fairy lights, past table 5, past my mother's frozen smile, out the big barn doors into the evening air. Behind me I heard the room drop to a murmur, and then heels on gravel. Fast, and my sister ran after me in front of everyone. Silk train gathered in her fists. She caught my arm at the edge of the parking lot, and the first words out of the bride's mouth were not an apology. "You're embarrassing me at my own wedding." I turned around slowly, gift box under my arm. Guests had trailed out onto the porch to watch, the way people gather at the window for weather. "Embarrassing you," I repeated. "Maddie, my seat is a folding chair next to the kitchen." "It's overflow, it's logistics," she snapped, cheeks blazing under her perfect makeup. "Why do you always have to make everything about you?" Before I could answer, I heard the click of my mother's heels on the flagstone, unhurried, regal, and Carol Adams arrived wearing the smile she saves for witnesses. She leaned in close so the porch couldn't hear, and her voice came out sweet and cold at the same time. A trick I've never seen anyone else pull off. "Get back inside and smile. You will not ruin this family's day." And there, in the gravel lot of a barn I had rented, I finally said the number out loud. "Mom, I paid $19,000 for this day." My mother did not blink. She straightened up, smoothed her jacket, and delivered the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. Family doesn't keep receipts. Then she took my sister's arm, the train got gathered up, and the two of them walked back toward the lights. Madison threw one line over her shoulder, already smiling for the guests. The seat was just logistics. Stop making it about you. The band kicked back in before they even reached the doors, some bright horn section song, and the porch crowd drifted inside to dance. I stood alone in the parking lot holding a silver box with my own check in it. I drove the 40 minutes back to my townhouse with the gift on the passenger seat, and the wipers came on somewhere around the county line, and her voice rode with me the whole way. That's where plus ones sit. There were no tears that night. I did something much more dangerous. I opened my father's ledger. My kitchen table has hosted 100 tax seasons, but it had never seen an audit like the one I ran that night. I took off my heels, made coffee at 11 at night, and laid it all out in rows. The Willow Bend contract, my signature. The catering contract, my signature. Florist, photographer, mine and mine. Bank statements going back 6 years, the $650 pulling out every month like a tide, the invoice for Mom's roof, the receipt for Madison's transmission. I laid them out edge to edge until the table disappeared, and then I opened Dad's green ledger and started at the front, where the entries are in his blocky mechanic's handwriting. Groceries, school shoes, Wanda, brake pads, dance class, Maddie. Page after page of a man quietly turning labor into a family, never once taking a bow. I sat there in the small hours adding up what I had carried since he died, and I want to be honest with you, the total wasn't the part that hurt. The part that hurt was that I'd had to add it up to see it. The ledger's back cover has a vinyl pocket where Dad kept gas receipts. When I lifted the book to close it, the pocket bulged wrong. I reached in and pulled out an envelope, soft with age, sealed. On the front, in that same blocky hand, was my name. For Wanda. When it gets heavy. I sat back down. Around me the whole table shone with paper, every sheet of it proof of the same thing my family had turned into a punchline at a wedding. The clock over my stove ticked past 2. I held the envelope up to the light like it might tell me whether I was ready, and my thumb found the corner of the flap. And I thought, 6 years, Dad. It's been heavy for 6 years. Then I opened my father's letter. The letter was dated 2 days before his heart surgery, the one the doctors called routine, right up until it wasn't. 1 page, ruled paper, written with the ballpoint he kept behind his ear. Wanda. If you're reading this, the shop's yours to sell. Don't let the buyer see you eager. Look after your mother. She's not as strong as she acts, and she acts instead of feeling. Always has. You know that. Look after Maddie. She's soft where you're solid. But hear me, kiddo, because I know exactly which daughter is going to end up holding this family, and I know what it does to a person. Help is a gift. A gift has to be received, or it isn't giving anymore. It's just a bill nobody signed for. Don't let love make you the bank. A bank is a building people visit when they want something. Be their family instead, even when that costs less. Even when it costs them. Love, Dad. I read it 3 times at that kitchen table, and the strangest thing happened. My shoulders came down from around my ears, some muscle unclenching that had been holding since the funeral. My father had seen all of it, 6 years in advance, sitting in a hospital admissions lounge with a ballpoint pen. He had watched his wife act instead of feel for 40 years. He knew. My dad asked me to take care of them. He never asked me to disappear so they could shine. I folded the letter and set it down gently on top of the Willow Bend contract, and the 2 papers sat there together, the heart and the arithmetic agreeing with each other for the first time all night. Then I refilled my coffee, opened my laptop, and created a new folder the way I would for any client whose accounts had been mismanaged. I named it Adams Family, Closing the Books, and I started a list. Monday morning, I went to work on my own family with the calm of a quarterly filing. Item 1, the wedding gift. The $5,000 check was still sitting in its silver box on my counter, because in their hurry to seat me with the kitchen, nobody had gotten around to opening gifts. I tore the check in half, and then, Because I am my father's daughter and belts go with suspenders, I drove to the bank and put a stop payment on it anyway. The teller asked if the check was lost. I said no, just the relationship. Item 2. The balances. What most people don't know is that wedding vendors collect deposits up front and the fat final invoices after. The caterer was owed $6,200, the videographer, $3,200. Those final bills were addressed to the bride and groom, and I had only ever promised out loud at a planning dinner to take care of them. So I wrote an email to Madison and Derek, copied my mother, short and civil. I confirmed I would not be paying the remaining $9,400, wished them well, and attached nothing, because I owed nothing. Item 3. My mother. I was not going to cut off a widow's electricity, whatever she'd done. I printed a letter and sent it certified mail. Effective in 60 days, the monthly $650 ends. Enclosed was a list of her providers and due dates, organized, because I can't help myself. 60 days is enough time to arrange a life. It is not enough time to arrange a story, which is the only thing I knew she'd actually work on. Item 4. The house. Madison and Derek had a meeting on the calendar with a mortgage lender, and I was expected there because Derek's commission income needed a cosigner with real books. I sent one line, "I won't be attending." Then I turned my phone face down and went to work. The phone did not enjoy its week. Let me pause right here and ask you something, friend to friend. If you've ever been the one who pays, plans, and carries, and still got seated by the kitchen, tell me in the comments what your folding chair moment was. I read them, and so do a lot of women who need to know they're not crazy. And subscribe, because what my mother did when the bills came due, you'll want to hear the ending. By Thursday, I had 17 missed calls and a voicemail box that read like a one-woman play. My mother's messages came in 3 acts. Act 1, weeping. "Wanda, honey, I don't understand. We're family. Call your mother." Act 2, prosecution. "You are punishing your own mother over a chair. A chair, Wanda. Your father would be ashamed of you." That one I listened to twice, standing at my kitchen counter, looking at the drawer where his letter now lived. Ashamed. She had no idea what was in my house. Act 3, weeping again, but angrier, which is a skill. Madison went with text, a long one about the videographer, capital letters blooming through it like mold. The wedding film was on hold until the balance cleared. Did I understand that? Their memories were being held hostage. I had promised. I looked at that text for a while. My sister was right about one thing. I had promised, back when I was the backbone and she was letting me believe it meant beloved. I typed my reply and kept it short. +1s don't pay balances. She did not text back. Derek tried next, calling from a number I didn't know, using his salesman voice, the warm one with the handshake built in. "Wanda, hey, let's be adults here. This is all one big misunderstanding." I told him I agreed completely. "For 14 months, I said, I misunderstood my role. That's been corrected." He was still talking when I said goodnight, and hung up, gently, the way you close a ledger. I slept 9 hours that night, deepest sleep in years, and I woke to my phone buzzing on the nightstand with a name that made me sit straight up in bed. Not my mother, not my sister. The screen said Patricia Whitfield. The other side of the aisle had started doing math. I did not answer Patricia's call, and I want to explain why, because it matters. I wasn't going to spend one breath campaigning against my mother. If you go around town telling your side, you become a side. Paper doesn't campaign. Paper just waits. So I let it ring out, and Patricia Whitfield left a voicemail that was polite, the way a frozen lake is smooth. "Wanda dear, Patricia. The caterer contacted us this morning. Apparently he could not reach the children. There seems to be some confusion about the remaining balance. Carol assured us that everything was, quote, taken care of. I would like to understand by whom. Call me." By whom? 60 years old and she could load a question like a shotgun. And then that same afternoon, my Aunt Ruth called. And Ruth does not do voicemail, Ruth does bulletins. Well, she said. It's spreading. Patricia's been telling the garden club the Adams side put in 30,000, because that's what your mother told them, in those words. The Adams side, meaning her. 30,000. My mother had not only taken credit for my money, she'd given herself a raise. Ruth wasn't finished. And at coffee hour Sunday, your mom's going on about accounts shifting and paperwork transitions. Airy little words. Doris asked her flat out if she needed help with her bills, and Carol laughed like Doris had told a joke. Honey, the paint is peeling. I thanked her and was about to hang up when Ruth's voice changed, dropped down to the register she used at Dad's funeral. Come by Saturday, she said. There's something about that seating chart you need to hear, and I'm not saying it on a telephone. I stood in my quiet office with the phone against my ear, and the check engine light in the back of my head came on again. Steady this time. Saturday could not come fast enough. Ruth's kitchen smells like percolator coffee and lemon oil, and nothing false has ever survived in it. She sat me down and got to it. The Wednesday before the wedding, I was at the planner's office helping fold napkins, because your mother volunteers me for things. Dana had the seating chart printed on the table. The real one. I read it, Wanda. Table 1. Carol, the Whitfields, Ruth, and Wanda Adams, sister of the bride, right next to me. I saw your name in print. The percolator gurgled into the silence. Then I get to that barn Saturday night, Ruth went on, and you're on a folding chair by the kitchen like a coat nobody claimed. That is not the chart I saw. Somebody changed it at the last minute, and I know one more thing. She held up a finger. Friday afternoon, your mother told me she was going to the venue, alone, to finalize details. Her word. Finalize. I sat with my coffee going cold. And a second memory surfaced, one I'd been carrying without understanding. Ruth leaned in. There's worse. At the rehearsal, Madison asked me why you refused to sit with family. Refused, Wanda. That was her word. And somebody fed it to her. Because you never refused a thing in your life. That's the trouble. So Monday morning I did what I do. Not a phone call, an email, to Dana the planner, businesslike. I noted that I was the signatory on 4 of her vendors' contracts, and said that for my records I would like the final seating chart, and any earlier versions, with the revision history. Paper trail? Complete. Dana replied within the hour. Apologetic. Thorough. Attaching both charts and her software's change log. I opened the log and read the last line, and then read it again. Final revision, Friday, 5:41 in the afternoon. Requested by Carol Adams. I called Patricia Whitfield back on Tuesday, on my lunch break, from my office with the door shut. No speech prepared. Just facts, dressed for work. Patricia, it's Wanda. You asked about the balances. Here's what I can tell you. I hold the 4 vendor contracts for the wedding. Venue, catering, florist, photography. I paid the $19,000 in deposits personally. I can forward copies if it would help you plan. There was a silence on that line so long I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice had lost its garden club lacquer. Then what exactly did Carol pay for? I looked out my office window at the parking lot and gave her the honest answer. The story. I heard her exhale, slow, the sound of a woman rearranging 2 years of dinner party impressions. Patricia Whitfield had spent this whole engagement believing she was merging with a solid family, and she had just learned the marble was contact paper. To her credit, she didn't gossip, and she didn't gush. She asked 3 crisp questions about the caterer, thanked me, and then, right before hanging up, she slipped. And the house. Derek said your family was helping with the mortgage this month. The house. The lender meeting. The co-signature from the sister with real books. Was helping, I said. Past tense is doing a lot of work in this family lately. Another silence, and then something I never expected from Patricia Whitfield. A short, dry laugh. One professional to another. After the call, I sat for a while watching the light move across my desk. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I'd finally handed off a box I'd been carrying up a hill for years. 3 days later, my sister found out what past tense costs. The lender meeting happened that Friday without me, which is to say, it barely happened at all. Derek's income was commission, feast, and famine, and the application had been built from the start around a cosigner with steady books and clean credit. Me. Without my signature, the numbers did what numbers do. The loan died on the table, the dream house with the wraparound porch went back on the market, and the $2,000 they'd put down to hold it stayed behind. Gone. Per the contract nobody had read as carefully as I would have. Monday afternoon, my sister walked into my office. No appointment. She stood in front of my desk in the middle of my workday, mascara smudged, wedding ring catching the light, and my receptionist hovering behind her like a referee. "You're doing this because of one seat," Madison said, voice cracking. "One seat, Wanda, you're blowing up my whole life over a chair." I asked my receptionist to give us a minute. Then I looked at my sister, 27 years old, standing in the office her transmission money had come from, and I kept my voice down where it lives. "No, Maddie, I'm doing this because of every seat before it." She stared at me. Outside my window, in the parking lot, Derek sat in his leased truck with the engine running. He hadn't bothered to come in. 2 years of my checks had bought that man's flowers and his filet, and I wasn't worth a walk across a parking lot. Madison turned to leave, got a hand on my door, and stopped. When she looked back, the anger had slipped, and underneath it was something I hadn't seen since before the wedding. Confusion. The real kind. "Mom said you refused to sit with us," she said quietly. "At the reception. She said you refused. Did you?" I looked at my sister for a long moment. "Ask Mom about Friday, 5:41 in the afternoon," I said. And I let her carry that home. If a sister has ever stood in your office, or your kitchen, asking you to fix a mess she helped make, you know exactly how heavy that doorway feels. So tell me in the comments, would you have paid the $9,400? Because what my mother staged next made the wedding look like a warm-up. Stay with me. While Madison carried her question home, my mother was discovering arithmetic. The 60-day clock on my letter was ticking, and for the first time since my father died, Carol Adams had to learn what her own life cost. She called the insurance company and heard the price of her own premium for the first time. She studied the list of providers I had mailed her the way she used to study the church newsletter. Ruth reported it all to me like a nature documentary. "Your mother told the women's circle that you manage her paperwork, and the transition is complicated." Complicated, Wanda. She made you sound like a filing error. But here's the thing about my Aunt Ruth. She has buried a brother, raised 2 kids on a nurse's salary, and she does not lie for anyone, not even blood. So when my mother stood at coffee hour going on about paperwork transitions, and poor Doris offered sympathy, Ruth set down her cup and said gently, at full volume, "There's nothing complicated about it, Carol. The girl just stopped paying your bills." I'm told you could hear the percolator. I'm told my mother laughed it off in about 4 seconds, which in that room was a lifetime. The story was cracking, and my mother did what she always does when a story cracks. She scheduled a bigger performance. My phone rang that night, and there was no crying in her voice this time, no acts 1 through 3, just steel and stage direction. "You will come to dinner Sunday. The Whitfields will be there. This family is going to sit down together and fix its reputation, and you are going to do your part." My part. I looked across my kitchen at the drawer with Dad's letter in it, and at the folder on my table with a seating chart log inside. Final revision. Friday, 5:41 in the afternoon. "Yes, Mom," I said. "I'll come. I'll even bring dessert." She hung up satisfied. She had her stage. She just didn't know who'd printed the programs. I spent Saturday night preparing the way I'd prepare for an IRS audit, which is to say, calmly, with a stapler. 5 sets of documents, 1 for each pair of adult eyes that would be at that table, each set in a plain, manila folder. Page 1, the 4 vendor contracts, my signature under each. Page 2, 6 years of bank statements, the $650 highlighted every month, the roof, the transmission. Page 3, my email declining the $9,400 in balances, polite as a thank you note. And the last page, the one I kept separate, printed on its own sheet and slid into only one folder. The seating charts, original and final, side by side, with Dana's revision log at the bottom. Final revision, Friday, 5:41 in the afternoon, requested by Carol Adams. I decided that night what I was not going to do. I was not going to raise my voice. I was not going to ask for $1 back. Not the $19,000, not the roof, not a cent. Because chasing it would hand my mother the role she plays best, the persecuted widow. I wasn't going to ask for my money. I was going to give them the one bill they'd never budgeted for. The truth. Itemized. Ruth called while I was boxing up a lemon cake. "Want backup tomorrow?" she asked. "Just sit where you can see Mom's face," I said. She laughed the Halloran laugh, my father's laugh, and told me Frank would have paid admission for this. After we hung up, I stood at my counter for a while with my hand flat on the stack of folders, the way you'd rest a hand on a Bible. Sunday dinner was set for 6 o'clock. My mother had planned a performance. I was bringing an audit. Sunday, 5:50. I parked across the street from my mother's house and sat in the car for a minute, folders on the passenger seat, lemon cake riding in back. The porch light was on. New bulb. She'd have had to change it herself. Through the front window I could see the dining room glowing, and my mother moving around the table in her hosting dress, setting out my grandmother's wedding china, the plates that only surface when there's an audience worth impressing. Patricia and Tom Whitfield were already seated, wine glasses catching the lamplight. Derek stood at the sideboard pouring like he owned the house. And Madison. My sister sat at the end of the table twisting her new wedding ring around and around her finger, looking at the china like it might bite her. Somewhere between my office and this dinner, the question I'd handed her had been doing its work. I got out, crossed the street, and stood on the porch my checks had kept dry, listening for a second before I knocked. My mother's voice floated through the door, bright as a hostess bell, aimed at Patricia. "Wanda has agreed to straighten everything out tonight. She just needed time to cool down. She's always been the dramatic one." I stood there with a cake box balanced on 5 manila folders and nearly laughed. The dramatic one. 40 years of watching this woman work a room, and she could still find a way to sell tickets to my surrender. "That's where +1s sit," said the bell-bright voice in my memory, and I let it ring, because tonight it was useful. I shifted the cake, raised my hand, and knocked on a door I used to walk straight through. Heels on hardwood, the lock, the swing of hinges. My mother opened the door wearing the smile she saves for witnesses. "There she is," she announced to the room. "There's our girl." The dining room smelled like pot roast and lemon pledge, the official perfume of my mother's ambushes. 6 chairs at the table, all full or claimed, Carol at the head. The Whitfields along one side, Ruth across from them, Madison and Derek paired at the far end. And for me, wedged into the corner by the hutch, my mother had set up a folding chair from the garage, the metal kind, with a cushion tossed on it like an apology nobody meant. "We ran short of chairs, sweetheart," she said, patting my shoulder as she glided past. She didn't even hear it. Ruth heard it. Her eyebrows went up into her bangs, and she looked at me across the room with an expression that said, "Is she serious?" Patricia heard it too. I watched Derek's mother clock that folding chair, then me, then the good china, and file it all somewhere behind her pearls. I set the lemon cake on the sideboard, sat down on the folding chair without a word, and placed my stack of folders on the tablecloth in front of me, squared to the table edge. Grace was said. Dishes went around. My mother waited until everyone had food on their plates, because a full plate pins a guest better than any rope, and then she dinged her wine glass with her knife and beamed down the table. "Now, before dessert, Wanda has something she'd like to say to everyone." She turned to me, glowing with mercy. "She wants to apologize for the scene at the wedding, and she's going to be resuming her little contributions to this family. Aren't you, sweetheart?" Every head turned. The Whitfields looked at me with careful, neutral faces. Derek smirked into his wine. Madison had gone pale around the lipstick. Ruth leaned back like a woman settling in at the movies. I looked down the length of my grandmother's china at my mother, and I slid the top folder off my stack. Actually, I said, I brought my apology in writing. I passed the folders around the table the way I'd hand out statements at a client meeting. One for the Whitfields to share. One for Ruth. One for Madison and Derek. One for my mother. The last set, with its extra page, stayed under my hand. Please, eat while you read, I said. It's organized chronologically. My mother's smile held, but her eyes had gone flat and fast, scanning for the exits. I kept my voice level, the voice I use for nervous widows and audited plumbers, and I walked them through it. Page 1. 4 vendor contracts for the wedding. Venue, catering, florist, photography. That's my signature on all 4. And my $19,000 in deposits. Paper rustled. Page 2. 6 years of monthly transfers covering this house's utilities and insurance. $650 a month. The roof over your heads tonight. That invoice is there too. Madison's transmission. Bottom of the page. Tom Whitfield, a man who has read a contract or two, was going line by line with his dinner napkin still tucked in his collar, nodding slowly at each page like a juror. I want to be clear about why I'm showing you this, I said. I'm not asking for $1 back. I'm correcting the record. Those are different things. My mother laughed then, a bright hostess laugh with nothing behind it, and waved her hand at the folders. Numbers, she said. Cold, ugly numbers. This is what Wanda does instead of loving people. She keeps score. And that might have worked. It had worked for years. Except Patricia Whitfield lifted her eyes from page 1 with the look of a woman who has just rebalanced an entire relationship in her head. Carol, she said quietly, you told us you paid $30,000. My mother stood up so fast her chair barked against the hardwood. 61 years old, and she went from hostess to hurricane in one breath. I raised these girls alone, she cried, hand flying to her chest, voice pitched for the back row of a theater none of us were sitting in. Across the table, Ruth said mildly, to no one in particular. Frank died 6 years ago, Carol. The girls were grown women. My mother pivoted without missing a beat. A new act. The prosecutor. This is what she does. Wanda always needs to be the hero. She always needs the credit. She waves her little papers around because she has no family of her own to love. The Whitfields sat very still, the way you do near a downed power line. Derek studied his wine, and I stayed in my folding chair, hands flat on the last folder, and let her burn through her repertoire, because I have watched this show my whole life, and I know it only has 3 acts: weeping, blaming, and then, when neither works, the threat. It came right on schedule. She leaned over the table, china rattling, finger aimed at me, voice dropping into something older and colder. If you do this, Wanda, you have no family. Do you hear me? None. The pot roast steamed gently between us. I looked up at my mother and I did not raise my voice, and the whole room leaned in to hear me anyway, which is a thing I learned that night. That quiet outbids loud every time. Mom, sit down. There's 1 page left. She didn't sit, but she stopped. 1 page, I said. Then I'm done. And it was Madison, pale, twisting her ring, who broke the silence, barely a whisper. What page? I took the last page out of my folder, stood, and walked it down the table. Not to my mother, to my sister. I set it in front of Madison on top of her untouched plate and went back to my folding chair. She read it. 2 seatings, printed side by side. On the left, the planner's original. Table 1, Carol Adams, Tom and Patricia Whitfield, Ruth Halloran, and Wanda Adams, sister of the bride. My name, in print, next to family. On the right, the final version, my name gone from every table. And underneath, 1 line from the planner's revision log. Final change, Friday, 5:41 in the afternoon. Requested by Carol Adams. My sister read it once fast and once slow, and her hand came up over her mouth. Mom. Her voice didn't sound 27. You moved her. You told me she refused to sit with us. You had me thinking she looked down on my wedding. You had me believing it for months. And I... She stopped, and her eyes came up to mine, wet and horrified. I said that to her face, Because of you. For 3 full seconds my mother tried to hold the pose. I never. That log is a mistake. Those computer things. And then, watching it fail in every face around the table, she swerved, and the truth came out of her sideways. The only way it ever travels. I did it for you, she snapped at Madison. The Whitfields did not need your sister sitting at that table being asked who paid for what. They didn't need to see our mess. Silence. Then Derek, God bless his timing, chuckled into his glass. It was 1 chair, ladies. Patricia turned to her son slowly, like a lighthouse coming around. You knew. Every eye in that dining room came to me, waiting for the explosion my mother had spent weeks advertising. The dramatic one. Instead, I stood up, straightened my grandmother's silverware where I'd sat, and then I picked up the folding chair I'd been given, collapsed it flat with one clean motion, and leaned it against the wall by the hutch. The little clack of the hinges was the loudest thing in the house. You gave me the +1 seat, I said, to the table, in the voice I use for closing statements. All right, but +1s don't co-sign mortgages, +1s don't fund weddings, +1s don't pay a widow's insurance for 6 years. I turned to my mother, who stood gripping the back of her chair with both hands. You told me family doesn't keep receipts. You were right, Mom. Family doesn't. I tapped the folder on the table, once, gently, like a gavel. +1s do. And you're the one who made me one. Nobody moved. Tom Whitfield was looking at my mother the way you look at a car lot that rolled back an odometer. Ruth had tears standing in her eyes and the ghost of my father's grin underneath them. And Madison sat with the chart in both hands, holding it like it was the only solid thing in the room. To her, and only to her, I softened. Maddie, when you're ready to own the thing you said, not the script Mom handed you, you know where my office is. I picked up my purse and my one remaining folder, and I left the lemon cake, because Ruth deserved dessert. My mother found her voice as I reached the hallway, one last register I'd never heard from her before, raw and cracking. Don't you dare walk out that door, Wanda, don't you dare. I looked back at her from the doorway of the house my money had kept standing, and I gave her the only line I had left. Watch me do it slowly. And I did. Down the hall, out the door. And this time, nobody ran after me. I was halfway down the walk when the screen door creaked, and for one strange second the wedding replayed itself. Footsteps behind me. Someone calling my name. But it was Ruth, carrying her purse and 2 plates of lemon cake, one for each of us, because my aunt does not leave a battlefield without provisions. We stood by my car in the porch light, eating cake off my grandmother's china, felons together. Frank would have folded that chair the exact same way, she said. Same little click and everything. That was the first time I smiled all night. Through the front window the show was ending without me. The Whitfields were gathering their coats, Patricia's spine straight as a fence post, Tom shaking his head at something Derek was still trying to sell him.